This podcast brought to you by Ring. With Ring cameras, you can check on your pets to catch them in the act.
Izzy, drop that.
Or just keep them company.
Aw, I'll be home soon.
Make sure they're okay while you're away. With Ring. Learn more at ring.com/pets.
Efficiency for people who are, investing in a new business and putting, sometimes their life savings, maybe it's their retirement, maybe it's, whatever, however they've come across the funds that they're going to invest in franchising, they're putting all their money into this. And so time and money and efficiency is really important. So whether it's me or another franchise attorney, it is a niche area of law.
Hello, everyone, and thanks again for tuning into the latest edition of Fran Coach's Franchising 101 podcast. I am Tim Parmeter, founder and CEO of Fran Coach and your podcast host. Today, we are going to welcome one of the premier franchise attorneys to talk to us about the potential role of a franchise attorney in this process. We're going to talk about some of the things like, should you even have a legal review? If so, at what point? And if so, why it absolutely positively needs to be a franchise attorney. Cannot stress that one enough. Don't use your Uncle Bob, who does family law and was pretty sure he remembers a chapter in his franchising book back in law school in the 80s. Not your person. But we're also going to really get into more important things like, what are some of the top questions people ask, and what are the ones that they should ask that they don't even know about? That's coming up. But first, who are we? And Fran Coach is a national search firm dedicated to working with individuals interested in owning a franchise. We're partnered with over 600 of the top franchisors in the country, spanning nearly 70 industries. Our number one goal is to help people find out and really get properly educated on franchise ownership to determine if this is the path for them. And if so, we're going to help you find your absolute best fit. All right, that's us. Now, here's our guest. All right, so that's a little bit about us. Now let's get with our guest, and happy to say this is a return guest to the world famous Franchising 101 podcast. Joining us is, and I love fancy titles in franchising because this is a cool one, shareholder and co-chair of franchising, licensing, and distribution with the firm of Saxton Stump. It is the one, the only Ms. Amanda Dempsey. Amanda, how are you?
Hi, Tim. I'm great. I love that intro. I like being the one and only. Thanks so much for having me today.
No, my pleasure. Thanks for coming back. And we've got a bunch of questions for you about franchise law, signing a franchise agreement, little the FDD, but we know it's really all going to be about that franchise agreement. And even a few that Team Fran Coach, some of our other coaches have thrown and suggested today. So, which is great because when I ask you those questions, if you think they're dumb, I get to blame it on somebody else. So it's perfect for me. So, but let's I want to hear the Amanda Dempsey story and kind of how you got into, like, you couldn't find like a noble profession, so you went to become an attorney. So, and then how did you get into the franchising side of things? Give us the scoop.
Yeah. So, I think with like a lot of people in franchising, I kind of fell into franchise law. I really was kind of undecided about what I wanted to do after college. My family, my dad's a psychologist, and I thought I wanted to be a psychologist, and was a psychology major in undergrad, and decided I really didn't want to commit like the next 7-8 years to a research psychology program, post-grad program. And, I thought a little bit, like law school at the time, when you're 22, it feels like, oh, only 3 more years of school. In the long scheme of things, that research program probably wasn't too long. But anyway, I decided on law school as the next step. And I always say I probably counsel people a lot more in my job than than I probably thought I would. So I'm putting those skills to use. So that's how I wound up in law school. When I was there, I was unfortunately there during the recession. And so I didn't really have much of an idea. I had worked for a real estate company and thought I would be a real estate attorney when I graduated. And unfortunately, the jobs were just, not really there in that profession because of the mortgage crisis. So, I had to rethink. And so I took a job at a firm just doing general corporate work. I was doing a deal, merger. No, I think it was actually an acquisition. Yeah, it was an acquisition of a franchise brand. And I didn't know anything about franchising. I didn't even know really what the definition of a franchise was at that point. But I was working this deal and, I really liked it. I liked learning about it. And so I kind of never looked back and I started doing deals that involved franchises more often. And then I just completely changed my practice into focusing on franchising, not only transaction stuff, but now we represent brands, mostly in the emerging and middle market. And, we help them we basically sit as like outside general counsel to brands. So we'll do all of their regulatory compliance, their FDD drafting and franchise agreements, that type of stuff, help them with dispute resolution. We're pretty much like a full service franchise firm. We defend them in litigation if it comes to that. And then the other large part of what I do is I just work with people who are interested in franchising. So either getting into franchising by purchasing a, new territory that they're going to develop with a brand that they really like and have connected with, or maybe they're going to be buying an existing location. So that's how I got to, know you, Tim. And that's a large part of, what I do every day is just like explain to people what franchising is and kind of give them the ropes around getting involved.
Awesome. And it's been no different even as an attorney getting into franchising, like almost everybody, it's like some version of dumb luck, right? And then the next thing you know, it's been because you've been on the franchising side for 10 years or so now, right?
Yeah, so yeah, you're right. I mean, it was really just kind of like twist of fate situation and it's been 12 years. Yeah. So
Gosh.
I still work with many of the people I started off this journey with, which I'm blessed to say. And yeah, just keeping after it these days. But yeah, it's just the years have accumulated over time.
Yes, indeed. So for people thinking about becoming a franchise owner, they get into the process. One of the big, like, feels like this is a big magical thing is when the franchise disclosure document comes out. There's really not a whole bunch in there that's going to tell somebody like, is this one the best one or this one the best one for them? But it rolls us into, as we get deeper into the process, that franchise agreement, which is usually when people come to you, right? Or they start thinking, do I need an attorney to review this? So like, I got a couple questions around this, but like, why should you, or maybe why should you not, when you're in that position trying to decide, should I do it or should I not?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and I get that question a lot. So when people contact me to, kind of pick my brain about reviewing an FDD or franchise agreement, they will oftentimes say, my neighbor's an attorney. Is this something that I could have them look at, right? And the answer is yes, of course. I mean, you can have attorneys look at it. General corporate attorneys can look at it. They know how to look at a contract. But most of us who have seen FDDs and franchise agreements, they know that they are, somewhere in the range between 200 and 300 pages. And so the number one reason is for efficiency, right? So as I mentioned earlier in my intro, I write these documents for a living. I know what the requirements are and I know where to look for certain things, right? So I know if there's something I'm looking for, I know it's going to be, if I want to find out, how many units are in, the state of Arizona, I know exactly where to look for that. I'll pop right to item 20 and I can find the person who's operating them. Somebody who's not familiar with franchising would probably read the full document before they were able to find out where that person is located in Arizona. So efficiency for people who are, investing in a new business and putting, sometimes their life savings, maybe it's their retirement, maybe it's, whatever, however they've come across the funds that they're going to invest in franchising, they're putting all their money into this. And so time and money and efficiency is really important. So whether it's me or another franchise attorney, it is a niche area of law. There's not many of us that do this type of thing, right? We know each other. We see each other at conferences. We all learn together at our CLE conferences and things like that. So it is a defined practice area, if you will. Much like you wouldn't go to, a divorce attorney to litigate a massive commercial dispute.
Right.
I would suggest, generally that you hire a franchise attorney to review your documents. It's better for you, and it's also better for the brand because they are trying to move things along. They obviously want you to get into the due diligence period as quickly as possible and give them relevant questions. And
Right.
so, it winds up being best for everyone if you have like, you know, representation that's in the area of that you're going to be entering essentially.
Yeah, and you probably were a little more diplomatic because you have attorney friends in other areas, but I just will flat tell everybody like if you're not using a franchise attorney, it's going to be a disaster. And frankly, as a candidate to that franchise, you kind of look dumb from that perspective, right? And use part of the analogy I always use is like if it's such a specialized field that at some point Danielle is going to divorce my ass, right? And so if I go to an accident attorney to represent me in that, well, that attorney was really good, or I know him, or whatever. Like I'll be lucky if I have my shirt at the end of that process because they don't know what they're doing, right?
Right.
So
Don't call me
um,
if that happens because I don't know what I'm doing there.
and when you chuckled like you had some advanced knowledge of that coming, so thanks for like whew. Okay, so as we start looking at a franchise agreement, and I've got some things I want to ask you about, but is there anything in particular that's like, you talked about like going to certain areas, just in general, if I come to you as a client, I'm like, hey, thinking about like moving forward with this franchise, can you do a review? What are we trying to, I guess, maybe even accomplish with that? Are we going in there and going, all right, Amanda, you seem awesome. Can you get them to waive the franchise fee and like reduce the royalties down to like next to nothing? What are we really trying to accomplish with this overall review?
Yeah, so I mean, a little bit of that is going to be dictated by the client and how aggressive they are. But the number one thing that I do from my perspective is I try to inform, and this is true for all business people. So it's whether or not you're, somebody that has previously held another job or you're, an executive in a large company. Um, a lot of times there are things that what I would consider industry standard in a franchise agreement, but that doesn't mean that they're fully understood by the person who's signing them. So
Right.
my first goal when I go into representing a client is just to make sure that they understand those things, right? So they're not necessarily things that we're going to be negotiating with a franchisor,
Right.
but there are things that I think the client should understand because they're signing a lot of times, 5, 10, 15-year contract where that term is going to apply to them. And so they should
Right.
understand that going in. A couple of those items, just like to rattle a few off, is like the personal guarantee requirement, right? Almost every franchisor requires it or will require it or wants to require it in their franchise agreement. And so I want to make sure that people understand what that means. That's not necessarily something that's going to be negotiable, but I want them to know, that they're putting a certain level of their personal assets at risk by signing this document, right? So that's one. The second one is like the choice of law requirement, right? So if you're in Texas and your franchisor is in Maine, there's a possibility that, you could be litigating with them in Maine if something goes wrong. So these are all things that I think are not really highlighted by the discovery day, even like the front pages of the FDD, because everybody wants to think about the positive things. So it's my job just to make sure that people are aware of some of those other provisions that are not necessarily things I'm going to say, you shouldn't sign this agreement because of X, but just that you should understand that this is what's going to be required of you as a franchisee, right?
Yep.
So that's kind of my top level goal when I'm working with a client. I do have a population of clients that are like, listen, I have certain things that are really important to me, and I will not sign this agreement if those things are not modified in this agreement. And so they'll say, I want you to make suggestions about ways that I could better position myself in this franchise agreement. And so with those types of clients, we'll do our best to kind of work with the franchisor and get to what their end goal is. Some of those things are determined by the personal franchisee. Like I just worked with someone recently that knows that they're only going to operate the business between 5 and 7 years. They're nearing retirement. And so the assignment section was very important to them and their ability to sell the business and that type of thing. So, we spent a lot of time looking at that section because that was important to that client. So, there's a lot that we can do there, but, generally the economic terms of the franchise agreement are not something I'm going to suggest that we go in and change and say like, hey, it's a $50,000 franchise fee. I only want to pay 20. The franchisor was going to say, that's great.
Go away.
Next, right? Franchisor is going to say pass and move on. So, there's some things that I wouldn't advise we go in and change unless they're really important to the candidate, candidly.
Yeah, it's and I'm glad you kind of put it that way, because it is mostly almost everybody we work with, I'm sure you talk to, they're signing a franchise agreement for the first time, and like it can be a fear producing thing, because sometimes the language, not sometimes, the language can sound one-sided, like in favor of the franchisor, right? And so understanding why it's there and how it's there to protect the brand. And if you are an owner that goes into that system and you're doing everything you're supposed to be doing, that language is actually then protecting you as well, which I don't think people always kind of think of that. And if you're the one that's going to go in and screw everything up, then you bet your ass that's directed right at you. And maybe we should rethink even signing it if you're not going to follow the plan. But we had a couple of our other coaches that came up with a couple questions. So again, I'm going to throw these at you. Like, what about this part of the franchise agreement? So if you like want to roll your eyes and go, these are dumb questions, then I will literally say which coach asked it so we can put them on blast on the podcast. And the first one is like, I don't even know if I can say this correctly. Indemnification. I was an athlete, so I ain't too bright. So it's a lot of syllables. What the heck is that?
Yes, that's a tough one. Indemnification I'll say it's in pretty much every commercial contract. So it's an important component. And I would say you're not alone in really not understanding what that means. So the indemnification section is basically like it's something that's probably a lot more understood than as a concept as people would think, right? So the idea is that, when we approach franchising, the idea is that the franchisor is its own independent business and the franchisee is also its independent business. So they're going to be working together in some way to achieve this kind of common goal, right? So this happens in other aspects of business as well. Non-franchise businesses oftentimes get into these situations as well when they're working with other businesses to achieve a goal. So what indemnification is when each party basically agrees to have the back of the other party, right? So franchisee is operating its business. Something happens at its business, let's call it a slip and fall, right? And the victim of the slip and fall sues the franchisor, right? In that instance, the indemnification provision of most franchise agreements would say, franchisee, this happened during the operation of your independent business. I'm not responsible for that. And so I'm going to get myself out of this lawsuit, but you have to repay me for, basically the expenses that I incurred. And again, if there's any type of loss, so, let's say in a weird world that case proceeded against the franchisor. So it's basically like you're going to take care of what happens because of the operation of the business and your actions, and I'm going to take care of, what happens by operating the franchise, right? There's usually some type of kind of bilateral joint indemnification. And so that's really what that means, but it's just a big word that solidifies that concept. And I would say if you think about it, like kind of practically, it makes a lot of sense. Sometimes the line between what is a franchisee's responsibility and what's a franchisor's gets a little hairy. And so sometimes that does come, that kind of shakes out in dispute. But I think the concept of it is really just that, right? Like you're going to run this business day to day. And so you're going to be responsible for what happens there because franchisor, I don't have oversight into what you're doing with your employees, with your customers, with your, food safety, right? All of those things you have to do, and I'm telling you have to do them, but I'm not there checking you every day. So if something goes wrong, you're responsible. So that's what that section covers.
in some ways, Amanda, would you like that's kind of the crux of what the franchise system is, right? Is franchisor is their business, you're the franchisee, you're running your business underneath that umbrella, but it goes back to the whole joint employer thing. Like you're not the manager of, McDonald's, you're the owner of that location of McDonald's underneath the franchisor kind of umbrella, right? But I think to me, like without that, like the whole industry kind of basically like goes away, which would
Yeah,
be
I mean, I don't think
not good.
I don't think a franchisor would participate in franchising anymore if they weren't going to be indemnified, candidly. I mean, it just
Right,
doesn't make any sense because, I mean, there are situations where a franchisor gets named by a plaintiff because they don't know,
right,
they don't have the contract between franchisor and franchisee, right? Like they're just a customer, so they're just naming who they can name, right? They're basically searching. And so in those situations, the idea is that the franchise agreement has already decided what's going to happen between franchisor and franchisee. They decided it in happy times, and so that's
right.
what they, will do in tougher times. So that's
Yeah.
kind of yes. I mean, it very much goes along with that independent contractor relationship. That's, basically what the foundation of franchising is. So
Yeah. Hey everyone, I wanted to take a quick break from our podcast to tell you about our amazing friends at Entrepreneur. If you're looking to become a franchisee or simply learn more about business ownership, and guys, let's be honest, you're listening to the Franchising 101 podcast, so we know you have some interest in this. And I really encourage you to go to entrepreneur.com to check out all of their great content and resources. Seriously, Entrepreneur has everything, all the way from a bookstore to the best podcasts, webinars, and videos, plus information on upcoming events and the latest articles that seriously, they cover all aspects of franchising and business ownership. If you're having trouble deciding which franchise is right for you, start with Entrepreneur's renowned Franchise 500 ranking, which highlights the best franchises of 2022. For 45 years and counting now, Entrepreneur has been and continues to be the most widely recognized and respected authority in the franchise market. Digital and print subscriptions are available, so you never miss out on anything. So seriously, what are you waiting for? Go to entrepreneur.com right now and learn more. So tell us about, there's a part in a franchise agreement at times called the spousal guarantee. What is that?
yeah, so I talked a little bit about the guarantee provision earlier. And so what that I should mention, when you're guaranteeing obligations under the franchise agreement, so if you're a franchisee, you're going to open your location. Most franchisors require some level of guarantee, which just means that you are guaranteeing your obligations to the franchisor under the franchise agreement. So it's not that you're personally guaranteeing the whole operation to your customers and to your employees, et cetera, but it's generally the payments that you have to the franchisor. So it allows the franchisor to make sure you're not going to just basically close your business and skip town. You're personally on the hook for royalties, brand fund payments, whatever it is that you're paying, right? In many states, there's what they call like a community property state versus, which is all different kinds actually. But in certain states, a husband or wife cannot basically bind their assets on their own. So if I were to sign a franchise agreement and personally guarantee the obligations under the franchise agreement, but my husband didn't, in certain states, that guarantee would be worthless because the assets are jointly owned.
Right.
And so they can't, those states don't force a spouse to basically lose their right to their assets because their other spouse did something that they didn't basically consent to. So it doesn't apply in every state, and it's not equally applied in every state, but most franchisors will just have them sign across the board so they don't have to basically run into a problem later. And again, this is like the doom and gloom of the business. It doesn't happen all that often, but it's just ways that franchisors can protect themselves. And I will say I work on the brand side as well as on the consulting with Z side. And sometimes people ask me, like, doesn't this seem like a lot, right? Like they're asking a lot of me. And the reason is that the brand, one of the most important things to each of these brands is their reputation. So, the brand takes a hit if the franchisee is not complying, right, with
Right.
either the franchise agreement, but also like their reasonable business practices, right? So if you have a franchisee that kind of goes off the radar,
Right.
um, it can be very difficult to A, shut them down, and B, sometimes even fine them. Like it can be really difficult for the brand. So, they give themselves tools, and really it's to protect them, but it's also to protect the other franchisees within the system. And so that's really important for you if you're a franchisee, because you don't want, if you have a bad neighbor, you have somebody in a neighboring territory that's like killing your reputation, you want the franchisor to have the tools to stop them.
Right.
And that's kind of what these things are. They're all just tools. It doesn't mean they'll all be used, but they're tools. And, franchisors over the years they've really figured out how difficult it can be to get kind of a bad actor out of their system. And so that's what they're there for. And generally, if I'm working with a client, that's how I explain it. Um, I haven't seen, I've been doing this 12 years on the brand side. I have seen litigation around this type of stuff, but generally speaking, a franchisor will, work out things if it's not a terribly bad actor. But when you have
Right.
that terribly bad actor, you really need the
Yeah.
ability to do something. So,
Yeah. Well, and I think the everybody's mind tends to go to the negative side of the franchise agreement, like, oh, they're trying to stick it to me, or am I getting screwed over, or like, I mean, you hear all sorts of things like this. But when you really position it the other way, like if you're going into this franchise system, are you planning on following the plan? Are you planning on being a good owner? If so, all of these things are really protecting you. Just what you said is protecting that brand, because a customer, we may own, pick your sandwich franchise. You may own one and I may own one 5 miles away. Well, you may be running yours into the ground and you're getting terrible reviews. The customer doesn't know I'm a totally different owner that's doing everything really well, right? I want the franchisor to come in and use every little thing they have in that agreement to get you in line or get you out, right? So it's like, when I think sometimes when people can just reposition it as like, I'm coming in here, I'm doing the right thing. These things are protecting me from somebody who's not. So I'm glad you talked about that, because I think that gets missed a lot in this for sure.
yeah, I mean, the real understanding of the general public about what a franchise is and like the ownership and like the independent contractor relationship. I mean, I didn't know anything about it before I was a franchise attorney, let alone, I mean, I was just a regular
Right.
consumer like anybody else, right? So
Right.
just like you said, somebody walking into, a franchise location in X city doesn't know that doesn't necessarily know that the, one that's in, city Y is not owned by that same ownership group. They just hear the
Right.
name and they think that they're all owned by the same ownership group. And I will tell you, like, if I talk about work outside of work, it's to explain that to people, because people will
Right.
be complaining about, this and over there, this one over there, and I got I got my order wrong, or it was too slow or whatever. And I'll say to them, it's not the same as this one in the next state over, right?
Right.
Because there's a lot about that in like the media sometimes, I mean, some multi-unit franchisees, I mean, they may be donating to certain political campaigns, and so like you'll see brands get really
Right.
hammered in the media because of something a franchisee did. And it's the brand, the at the franchisor level, they really have to pay attention to that, because the brand reputation is just really important. And so I have those conversations with clients on both sides, right? The brand
Yeah.
side, but then also on the franchisee side, with people who are getting involved with a brand, just to explain to them, like, if you don't want to follow rules, might not be for you,
Right.
because there are
Yeah.
rules and they're going to enforce them, and this is why, right?
Yep.
So
Yep. Absolutely. Because otherwise, why are you doing a franchise if you don't want that brand? Even if it's one, maybe they have, 20, 30 locations, it's still a brand. They're going to grow into more of that, and you're not creating it all yourself. Right. So, um, okay. So now you are a franchise owner, right? And franchise agreements have some sort of term limits, 5, 7, 10, 15, I think is the biggest one I've seen. Right. But so does that mean, as a franchise owner, I come in, I'm signing this agreement, like this is a 10-year term. Oh man, I am locked. I'm stuck here no matter what, how bad it goes. The flip side is it's going great. Oh, dang, do I have to stop in 10 years? Talk about kind of the term limit, so to speak, with this.
yeah, so I will say, I think that sometimes people don't consider how long of a time 10 years is, right? So it feels short in like the lifetime of, your working years, right? It feels
Right.
short. Um, but I do, I try to impart that upon people. So franchise agreements are not generally what I call unilaterally terminable, which means that one party can just terminate them for no reason and walk away, right? So you are entering into a contract and it's a relationship. The franchisor, if all things are going well, the franchisor is going to expect that you will operate that business for a minimum of 10 years and you should be, ready and willing to do so. Um, on the other side of things, I mean, there's ways to exit, right? So if you have decided after 5 years that everything's going great, but you want to change for whatever reason, you can look to sell. So, there's tons of companies out there that will help you do that. The franchisor may even have a resale program within their company, and they'll help you find a buyer. And so it's not like, it's impossible, right, for you to leave the relationship if you want to. But just kind of walking away, shutting your doors, and telling everyone to kick rocks is probably not your best method of exit, right? So, you can also, I mean, many franchisors will do a negotiated exit. You could buy out of your contract. You could, if things are really not going well, there's a potential for a mutual termination. The parties
Right.
agreed to just terminate. There's also, in many cases, your franchisees may be signing a lease or they may be buying substantial equipment. So there's those things to think about too, right? If you're going to close down and you have these assets that you need to kind of deal with that are in addition to the franchise agreement. So so there's ways to exit, and I consult with clients all the time on how best to do that without, as I mentioned, kind of making everyone angry and, just like locking the door and throwing away the key, right?
Yeah. Right.
Because the franchisor won't be happy if you do that. On the flip side, as you mentioned, there's many franchisees who are very successful and after 10 years want to continue. Most franchise agreements have some type of renewal right where, you can renew for a number of extra years if you're a franchisee in good standing and, you're a glowing example for the franchise brand. They'll certainly allow you to renew. And even after you've exhausted those renewal terms, if you're still really, killing it in the business, I'm sure that a franchisor would be happy to kind of sign a new
Right.
agreement with you. So, and one of the, I do get questions about, well, why do we have all of these like 10-year check-ins? Like, why isn't it just renew automatically? And I think one of the things that's probably most important to the franchisor is that they keep, as a brand, they're going to keep innovating, right? So things are going to change about the
Right.
system. If you think about the difference between a franchise agreement that was signed in, let's say, 1989 and then 1999, right? With like the internet becoming a thing. There's many things that change in a 10-year term. And if you're working with a good brand, there's probably positive things for you that have changed, right? So the agreement at that time is usually looked at again, and they may have some updates to it that you would need to agree to. But again, it can be very positive for you in the sense that, maybe they've developed a new set of services or they're offering additional products, and that just needs to be memorialized in the agreement. So that's kind of the reason for the terms being the way they are. If you're asking for my opinion, but again, if you're killing it, a franchisor will always be willing to work with you. So
Yeah, they're not like, oh my gosh, this is the best owner we've ever had. I'm sorry, your term is up. You have to go, right? Like
Yeah.
that's not going to happen. And even when people do sometimes have to or want to exit before the term, again, it goes back to like, have you been the rogue player, right? Yeah, like, do they have the right to stick it to you? They sure do, right?
Mhm.
And I'm sure you've seen this. We had a client a few years ago. He got cancer and passed away, right? Well, they didn't go back to the wife and go, yeah, sorry, you got 8 more years. Like,
Yeah.
so again, it's when things are being done the right way, there's going to be there's a little kind of common sense that gets mixed in there as well. But no, so that's good. I'm glad we talked about the exit. What else? Maybe throw one more thing at you. What else about the franchise agreements that maybe we haven't talked about that you'd really want to make sure somebody is aware of?
Yeah, I mean, so there's tons of things. I would say the very like so the thing I always tell people, and this probably doesn't is not great job security for me, but the goal is that this agreement gets signed and locked in a drawer and never looked at again, right?
Right.
So the most important thing about the franchise agreement is that everyone knows what they're signing, right? It's not so much the terms, it's that everybody understands and identifies the terms because then they'll be acting as if, right? They're
Right.
acting in accordance with.
Right.
And they don't have to be surprised that in paragraph 3, clause F, I'm not allowed to do X, right?
Right.
So that's the very most important thing. If you ask me, like if I had to pick one thing about it, is that, we just need to make sure that we're all clear on what's required of us. The other thing I would say is that people should really look at the things that we mentioned, like exiting. They should look at dispute resolution. They should look at those things that unfortunately are, I don't want to say the negatives, but if things go bad, that's when franchise agreements get pulled out. And so you need to know what's going to be expected of you. You need to know, like, how many times can I default before a franchisor can terminate me? Like
Right.
those types of things. Because I mean, some defaults can be small. It could be like I forgot to submit a report or something like that. So those things are important to understand. What types of actions are considered terminable default. And the reason I say that is because the termination can be really significant in terms of your investment. It means we terminate this agreement, we owe you no money, right?
Right.
Um, so I think, those things are really important to understand. And again, like those are not going to be highlighted in Discovery Day. Nobody's going to be
Right.
talking about exiting when they're talking about entering, right?
Right.
So it is really important. So I mean, those things are things that I talk to clients about probably more so than, what the fees are, because those are, I find that people spend a lot of time independently on those things. Like,
Right.
what do I have to spend? What is this going to cost me? Super smart people will do, these business plans and evaluations, and they'll do projections, and they have all of, I mean, they have all of this knowledge on like the economics and the financial component of what this business is going to look like, but they have no idea that these other terms exist
Right.
regarding, termination. Um, so I would say, that would be one thing that I feel people should maybe look at a little bit more. And just, be aware that, because, I find that this comes up a lot because most people involved in franchising have some type of entrepreneurial spirit.
Right.
And so they have big goals about what they're going to do within the brand. And the brand may have different goals, and so, it's not always a wonderful fit in that sense. And so it's just important to know kind of how strong those parameters are and how to work within them so you can protect yourself and protect your investment. And then the franchisor is going to do the same thing, right? They're
Right.
absolutely going to protect themselves and protect their investment. So, um, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's like the doom and gloom of it, but that's my job, right?
Right. Yeah, it should be like a marriage. And in the grand scheme of things, after 5 years, there's more franchise businesses still in operation than there are marriages still in operation. So, I mean, that's the crazy stat of it. And if we were all smart, we'd all have prenups. But
Yeah.
so
Yeah, your franchise agreement's like a little bit like a prenup. It's kind of like a prenup.
yeah.
It lays stuff out like that. But I will say, like on that same point, one of the things that I tell people from the very first conversation that I have with them is that the most important thing is not what's in this document that's signed. Because again, as I said, hopefully you know it, you understand it, you know what's required of you, you put it in the drawer and you never see it again.
Yeah.
But really, the most important thing is that you get along and have the same kind of like mission, values, work ethic as the people that are in the franchise brand that you match with. And
Yep.
I've said this to you before, and I'll say it 1,000 times. Like people buy franchises for, reasons that I will not ever understand, right? They have a feeling about a certain mission. They're really behind, um, you know, animal causes or the elderly or education or whatever it is that their passion is why they're pursuing this franchise opportunity. And they need to make sure they're aligning with folks who have that same feeling,
Right.
because it is like a marriage. I mean, it's at least 10 years in many cases, sometimes 5, but for most, most
Right.
agreements, it's at least 10 years. So we just need to make sure that when we're, you know, basically meeting with these brands and kind of doing our evaluation of whether we're a good fit, that like they're a good fit for us too, right? It's not just us to
Yes.
them, but that, we're also a good, fit for each other. So
Absolutely. No, I love it. The people side of this, I think, is almost like forgotten, or people don't realize how important that is. And when you do get to that last phase of the meets team day, discovery day, whatever, like there's a certain element of also trust your gut. Are these people, do I feel good about the people, their brand for certain, but just them as individuals, their culture's buzzy. I hate saying it, but just like kind of trust your gut that you got a vibe of like, okay, these people, I trust them. They've got my back. Let's go. Right. Yes, there's the unsexy legal portion of the show that you still definitely need to understand. And when you're at that point, we should definitely reach out to Amanda, and she'll take very good care of everybody.
I try. Yeah. No, I mean, it's honestly one of the more rewarding things I do. Because, it is really inspiring to see people kind of go after, as I mentioned, like people get involved with brands for a lot of different reasons, but many people get involved just because it's, an area of passion for them. So
Yeah.
it's really exciting to me to see how that, just how that plays out for them, and just be a part of that, essentially just getting them set up. So I love working with prospects. I like what I do for so many reasons, but it is really exciting to see somebody like on signing day, both on the brand side and on the
I
franchisee
know.
side. A lot of brands that I work with are in that emerging space, and so seeing them sign up, like, their first 5 franchisees, and just, kicking off this journey with them is really, really rewarding. So
Yeah, no, it's fun. It's exciting. We probably should, as an industry, do a better job of celebrating that particular moment. But no, it is. It's and again, so no, I appreciate you taking some time to talk about all this, because it is the part that I think is like most people are a little out of their depth when it gets into a 200 or so page franchise disclosure document and the franchise agreement and all this stuff. So thank you so much. As always, great talking to you, and appreciate you coming on and sharing some of this amazing knowledge about the franchise agreement.
yeah, thank you so much. I had a great time, and thanks for having me. Always welcome the opportunity to be on the show. So hit me up whenever. I'm here.
Awesome. Will do. Amanda, thanks so much. Okay, thanks again to Amanda Dempsey from Saxton Stump for joining us today to talk about all things about the franchise agreement and why you need a franchise attorney. Before you need the franchise attorney, you need a franchise coach. We got a handful of good ones, 11 now at Fran Coach. Reach out to us, francoach.net, franchising101podcast.net. There's never, ever any fee for our service. Let us help you get, again, properly educated about franchise ownership to determine if this is for you. And if so, we're going to help you find your absolute best fit so you can create your better tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you next week.